And the government is actively prosecuting drug manufacturers, accusing them of explicit collusion to divvy up the market for generic drugs.
And it makes us wonder about car rental companies, candy makers, concert ticket sellers. Wherever you see a suspicious lack of competition, you should ask yourself, am I paying more because of this? Consider the new economic standard for collusion. Does it pass the Chunky Monkey test? Today's episode was produced by Willa Rubin and
This is the Indicator of Planet Money. I'm Waylon Wong.
And I'm Derek Woods. As interest rates have risen, there are urgent debt crises looming in the global economy. About 60% of low-income countries are having trouble keeping up with debt payments. That number is growing at an alarming rate. It has doubled in just the last few years.
This long list includes countries like Tonga, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Many of them have a staggering number of people living in poverty and are dealing with a lot of economic pain that these loans are supposed to help them with.
It's a huge concern for an organization that's supposed to help stabilize the global financial system and help countries prosper. That's the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. And lately, the IMF has been sounding an alarm bell about what it sees as a dangerous debt wave threatening to overwhelm a lot of countries.
Today in the show, we talked to a leader at the IMF about how so many countries found themselves in trouble and what the fund is doing to try to keep the global debt crisis from escalating.
These are periods where countries accumulate a lot of debt really fast. And each of the first three debt waves ended when there were these big economic shocks culminating in widespread economic meltdown. There was the Latin American debt crisis of the 1980s, there was the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s, and the global financial crisis starting in 2007.
Now, you might be wondering, what about the fourth debt wave? Well, Jayla says that's the one we're in now.
So we have a fourth wave since 2010, and this has reached almost tsunami levels during the pandemic.
Tsunami levels of debt. Jayla says that governments, both high and low income, needed lots of money in the last couple of years to deal with all the unexpected events that rocked their economies. So the governments borrowed that money. They borrowed from the IMF and from other countries, and they also sold government bonds in financial markets. These countries felt like they had to.
We had the pandemic, we had the war, we have now the inflationary pressures, we have the climate-related disasters in many countries.
For a lot of low-income countries, as their expenses went way up, their revenue went down. Think of countries like the Maldives or Grenada. Pandemic shutdowns wiped out tourism, and that meant a lot less revenue coming in.
When you have all these shocks hitting countries, undoubtedly the growth slows down and they go into difficult periods, and that's why.
Another big problem has been the strong US dollar. These lower income countries typically borrow in dollars, and when the US currency is strong, it means that these governments need even more dollars to keep up with their debt payments.
These dynamics added up to unsustainable amounts of debt for lower income countries. Some of them defaulted, they couldn't pay up.
And now, for the first time in its history, Lebanon is defaulted.
And now, for the first time in its history, Sri Lanka has defaulted on its national debt.
That's made it Africa's first pandemic-era sovereign default, and things haven't improved.
And unlike when an individual person or a company can't pay their debts, it's not like there's a straightforward bankruptcy process and court that governments can just go to. Countries that run into debt problems have to sit down with their lenders and